an incandescent debut novel that I am so excited for people to read. It's called Great Black Hope. It's set in New York in sort of the present day, but I'll tell you, I kept thinking about Bright Lights, Big City by J. McInerney, which, you know, if you haven't read Bright Lights, Big City, or you haven't read it in a while, go back. It holds up. I've reread it now simply because of this interview, to be perfectly honest, because I was like, wait a minute, I feel like there's okay. And Rob, I'm so excited to talk to you about Great Black Hope because you're doing a lot in this
Thank
novel.
you.
And I really like David Smith. I really like this kid and I really like his world. And man, he's a mess, but he's a perfectly acceptable, successful mess.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm so excited to discuss Bright Lights, the 80s,
Oh, man.
party novels, kind of all of the above.
Okay, but Great Black Hope. You started writing this in what, 20? I mean,
Yeah, I started
2020?
writing this the day before my 26th birthday, which I mean, at this point, I guess that was like, what, that's 6 years ago? And
Okay.
then like put it away for a couple years and basically picked it back up during fall of 2020. So like height of the pandemic. And had just moved back to New York from Berlin.
Oh,
And
seriously?
yeah. I
Oh,
was
that's a
living there
wait, that was
for
a choice. Wait, how do you say goodbye to Berlin and come back to New York when literally the city is empty and shut down?
totally. I mean, there I think because they have a stronger sense of like order in
Yeah.
Germany. I actually think that being there for the pandemic would have been more lockdown.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I was coming back. I mean, I was applying for grad. I started grad school in fall of 2020, so that was like kind of my reason for returning. So I was at NYU for that, and like
Mm.
yeah, coming back to a New York that was totally shut down and was like kind of a different city from the
Mm.
city that I had lived in like the first half of my 20s. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of the kind of like nostalgia for the kind of lively, dynamic,
Mm.
manic city was born from the fact that I was like sitting literally like huddled over my laptop at outdoor
Yeah.
cafes like in the middle of winter when I was writing.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. I can totally. But wait, when were you here the first time? What years
So
were
I
they?
was here, I've lived here basically on and off for coming up on 10 years. I'll have my,
Okay.
my 10-year anniversary in the fall.
Okay.
So
So
I,
like
yeah,
2010, 2011 because I mean, you Great Black Hope has a lot of the energy of a New York that doesn't really exist anymore.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I mean, and it's not just sort of post COVID, it's also, I mean, yeah, Bright Lights, Big City, 84. I'm just like, oh, right. It really, I mean, I read it as a teenager,
Yeah, totally.
but it seriously holds up. But 90s New York gets left out. Like, we have memoirs of 90s New York, and Mark Ronson actually has one coming up this fall that I'm
Oh, yeah. I'm excited to read
dying to
that.
read. But like 90s New York was so random and weird. And there are stories that I am not going to tell on this episode of the show. But we all had these crazy moments where you're like, and then I ended up at this party and, and you
Yeah.
sort of list off a bunch of people and you're like, I don't understand. I mean, I watched what? There are a lot of us who have these weird stories and we try not to share them in recordings ever. But meeting David and his roommate Elle and his friend Carolyn, and we're just going to sort of stick to the three of them, and maybe David's
Sure.
family pops in a little bit because they're kind of the big beating heart
Yeah.
of this novel. But meeting these characters, I was just kind of like, oh, you would not be out of place in earlier moments in New York. And I loved
Yeah.
that. There's a continuity of New York that runs through Great Black Hope. And it's partially the party novel. It's partially, yeah, it's the drugs and not so much rock and roll, but like the art scene, right? There's
Yeah,
always been an
sure.
art scene in New York. And there's always been sort of who's making the money off of the art and who's not
Mhm.
making the money and who's doing,
Completely.
and what clubs you're sort of circulating through. I mean, some of the places I used to play at in my youth do not exist anymore, and that is not a bad thing. You walk by them
Wait, I
now
want
and
to
you're
hear
like,
more about you were DJing? What were you
no,
doing?
no, no, no. I was just enjoying life in New York.
Oh, you okay, you used to play at. I was like,
No.
oh,
Oh,
okay,
no,
what
no,
would you
no, 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 no,
play?
no, no, no. I have
You
zero
mean
musical talent. No, we just used to run in packs like young people.
completely,
And
completely.
we were
A sense of play. Yeah.
feral. We were
Yes.
feral in cute shoes. That's what
I
we
certainly remember feeling feral in cute shoes in my 20s in New York. Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, like I definitely wanted to kind of strike this balance of like it having a kind of timeless feel where like someone could kind of pick up this book in 20 years and like recognize some sort of like essential energy of New York. And that was so inspired by the fact that I'm very informed by a lot of like New York texts from kind of like other eras. So I mean, I'm a huge like Just Kids fan. That's one of my kind of all time favorite books. And so yeah, like I was definitely kind of channeling a voice and certain references from 70s New York, 80s New York, etc. But then I also wanted it to feel current and have certain
Mm-hmm.
updates that like reflect kind of how we live in the city today. And I also, to your point, like I do think it's the book is set in 2019
Mm-hmm.
and it is reflective of, I think, it is a very like 2010s New York book where like when I was like interning in the city, basically every summer during college, I was in New York. And, that was still kind of height of like indie sleaze and like misshapes and like those kinds of parties. And also then I was like on Tumblr in high school and college, like looking at photos of Alexa Chung or whatever. And so there's kind of that version, like the sort of recent heyday of like nightclub New York, which I think like nightclubs have sort of, maybe I'm just not in the know, but I think like nightclubs are not having a golden
They're
age right
no,
now.
no, no, no. They are not. I mean, you can buy pizza now at the Limelight,
Yeah, totally. So
and I got to tell you, even that, like the Limelight was just. I'm still not sure how I feel about being able to buy pizza at Limelight.
yeah, well, I mean, I've been getting all the TikToks about how St. Mark's place is a brunch spot now. People go out and brunch on the avenue. So
Also, New York closes now at like 10 o'clock,
yeah,
and I mean, we there were lots of late nights.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I almost think it's interesting because I mentioned Berlin. Like, I know that there is still a very vibrant kind of like, Ridgewood, like kind of rave club
Yeah.
scene, and especially like a kind of gay club
Yep.
scene. But in a way, I mean, like I so associate, like if I go to Basement or something, to me, I'm like, okay, like just other cities do that better. Like Berlin is always going to do that version of a party better versus like what no other city in the world can do quite like New York is the kind of Studio 54, like glitzy but still has like a touch of grit to it thing. And like I don't really know that exists in New York anymore.
No, it really doesn't. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but like also places like Florent are gone, right?
Mm,
Like I was talking to an old pal last night who'd had a bar over in Chelsea before it was Chelsea. And he's like,
yeah.
so the rent when we started was $8,500. And by the time we were ready to be done, it was $36,000 a month. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, those are numbers that I don't even understand how you
Yeah,
make that
incomprehensible.
work, but also class factors into Great Black Hope in a huge way. And I think New York too, like there New York has become sort of very buttoned down and
Mm,
there are apartments in the financial
yeah.
district now and all this kind of stuff. But it used to be that you'd have this collision, right, of art and
Mhm.
money at any given point. And like you just literally never like you could be at dinner with someone and you'd be like, what do you do? And someone would work at Morgan Stanley and you're like, why are you here? But okay. Like it was just a constant mix and a bubbling kind of thing, right? Or you'd say, oh, somehow I ended up at a party at so and so's and I still have no idea how that happened. But there was a lot more energy and a lot more of that kind of serendipity and novelty and like, wait, who was that? What?
Yeah.
And not necessarily, but like, someone's cousin tags along and it turns out that, they're a lawyer and you're like, okay. Mm. I mean,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's part of what draws me to kind of like party scenes is
mhm,
that they can be these sorts of like collisions of people from different class backgrounds, race backgrounds, professions,
mhm,
industries, etc. Like people who would never normally kind of engage meaningfully in their
right.
day-to-day lives are sort of forced into proximity and the doors are kind of closed
Right.
at in nightlife and like the kind of tensions that arise from those like enclosed spaces and yeah those sorts of collisions are very interesting to me.
When did you have David's voice?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Like the David Smith character, I share a lot biographically in common with him, and I made this kind of like active choice to tell the story in third person, like kind of close third person. In part because like I'd been working on something else that was in a first person voice, but with a speaker and protagonist that I had very little biographically in common with. And so like moving on to this project, I wanted like a new challenge. And yeah, I was kind of interested in this character who was like lived this life split between like the southern black bourgeoisie world of his parents and the kind of like downtown New York club scene. And before I started writing the novel in earnest, I actually wrote a short story titled Smith that
Oh,
like
good. Okay.
was a kind of experiment with
Okay.
this voice. So was experimenting with this character, but told in like close third. And like going into his like family history and following him around kind of the city for a day, basically. And I liked that as a mode a lot because I was also interested in like the kind of edges or the margins of what like Smith understands about himself, but also like what he doesn't see clearly. And so being having a voice that's like capable of like stepping slightly out of his consciousness allowed us to kind of see, I think there are moments in the novel, particularly with as regards his relationship to Carolyn, who's like
Mm-hmm.
a wealthy white woman, where he feels like he kind of has like the moral high ground.
Yeah, he's a little snotty when it comes to Carol.
Yeah,
They're friends, but he's a little snotty about her in a way where there were a couple of moments where I was like, young man.
totally. Yeah, he is.
There's a little bit of hypocrisy happening here. And it's something,
Absolutely.
listen, it's something all young people do. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like I'm actually judging Smith. And I do love the fact that you use his last name. It's just, there's a thing you do when his dad shows up too, and you're like, the David Smiths. And I'm like, oh, that's such a good device. Like, more people should do that.
Thank you.
But going back to Carolyn, I mean, David does really feel like he has a moral high ground where I'm like, sweetie.
Yeah. No, there's a ton of hypocrisy and like at times just like a kind of lack of empathy and even like cruelty towards
Mm-hmm.
her. And like that, yeah, having a voice that is capable of like a little bit of distance from Smith instead of the first person, I think allows us to see that like me, the authorial voice,
Yeah.
I'm not completely kind of aligned with what Smith is thinking.
I think, too, you can't write a novel like this in the second person without feeling like someone has gone a little too close to Bright Lights, Big City. I mean, Mohsin
Yeah,
Hamid
sure.
did it with How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia. He uses the
Okay,
second
interesting.
person really, and the claustrophobia is amazing. Like, if you have a chance, also, it's like this big. I mean,
Okay, yeah, I'll read it.
you can read it in like a weekend, but yeah, you can't ever use the second voice again. Like, no,
Yeah,
it's been done. That's the thing that's been done. You can do voice, and I mean, Great Black Hope is a gorgeous voicey novel, and you kick us between New York and Atlanta, and then back to New York. But like everyone has, like David's roommate Elle, who we're going to skirt around a little bit. Like Elle has this wild background too, but she moves between class and the
Yeah,
arts, and like Elle has access in ways that we've really mostly seen for white characters
totally.
in fiction. And I mean, as you and I were talking about before we started recording, part of why I'm happy to have Great Black Hope out in the world is I'm like, look, everyone gets to be a drunk and an addict, and there's not like some
Yeah,
traumatic story behind it. Someone just made
sure.
a bad decision or isn't, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm bobbing my head, but it feels very radical in a way to be able to put out a novel like this where it's just like badly behaved middle class kids making not great choices, but we get a great story out of it because it's not us, but it kind of is us, right?
Yeah, and like, in the novel, Smith is constantly seeing other people, specifically like white people in like recovery rooms and courtrooms trying to like impose a kind of like dramatic narrative onto him. Like they want to understand him through the kind of lens of like racial trauma, essentially, where it's like, this arrest must be the outgrowth of like an absent father or like blah blah blah. But it's kind of like, no, like he just
He made a
was
bad decision.
yeah, he was
And
like using drugs in the
he
same
did
way
a
that
wicked dumb thing and he got pinched.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that's really how
yeah.
everything gets kicked off. And so the idea that, we can have this kind of story and there's not like, and then he was an orphan and then,
Yeah.
his dad absconded to Finland and never
Yeah,
came
for
back,
sure.
all of this kind of stuff. It's more like his parents are looking at him, but I do love the dynamic between him and his parents because they're just kind of like, what does this mean? And isn't it just your friends being terrible? This can't
Yeah,
be
yeah,
you.
yeah.
And he's like, well, actually.
He's like, it kind of is. Yeah, it's like right. His kind of main error isn't assuming that he is like his friends, basically. Like is kind of assuming that like lights will turn green for him in the same way. And like, his behavior isn't dissimilar. And in some ways his background isn't that dissimilar
Right.
from a character like Carolyn. And also, I mean, I before I forget, like I really like the point that you're making about the L character having like access to these sorts of spaces. I mean, I think part of both L and Carolyn's appeal to Smith is like, Smith is a product of the kind of like professional class, like Southern Black bourgeoisie. Like parents are like academics, doctors. But Carolyn and Elle are both kind of products of like coastal elite, like cafe society. Like they're proximate to fame and like extreme amounts of wealth. And so it's a different world that like Smith doesn't totally have like a passport to, and he's very drawn to these characters that are kind of giving him access to those worlds.
But his parents, again, I mean, this, right? Respectability politics, it can be used as a cudgel. It's a
Yeah.
generational, it really is a generational thing, right? Like, I mean, you and I are both products of the civil rights movement in the US,
Yeah.
right? Like, we have had great opportunities for schooling and all, I mean, all of that kind of stuff, right? But at the same time, I remember having conversations with my parents and I'm like, wow, you just said that.
Hmm.
That's a
Yeah.
thought. Maybe let's not use the word Oriental ever again unless
Yeah.
we're talking about rugs. That would be cool.
Totally.
These are my parents, right?
Yeah.
Or hey, I'm not going to take that consulting job and I'm going to go work in a bookstore. Oh yeah, that went over exactly as well as you thought
Yeah.
it would. Did it anyway. But I do think Smith's parents are a product of not just their environment in Atlanta. They're both educators. They have worked very hard to
Sure.
get
Yeah.
where they are. And they're looking at their son going, wait, what just happened here? Like, we've given you all of this opportunity. We've made all of this runway for you. And this is what we get? We have to go to the Hamptons and get you a lawyer and we have to what?
Yeah.
And sort of the disappointment is palpable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I mean, first, it's funny because I did take the consulting job
Yeah.
out of college. Like I went into consulting and only kind of found my way back to a sort of creative path with time. But like, I mean, in the book, we see three generations of Smith's family. We see his grandmother, and like there's a kind of flashback where we learn that she grew up on a sharecropping farm. So she herself is basically one generation removed from slavery and kind of escapes, you know, racial terror in the deep South and moves to the urban South and kind of sets the family along this path of kind of upward mobility. That's then continued with Smith's parents' generation. They all they're the ones who go to Ivy League colleges and do the thing that's like, do the pre-professional safe thing. They become doctors, they become lawyers, they become academics. And then Smith is in the kind of like third generation of this like uphill climb. But we see basically, I mean, part of what I wanted to convey was how that generational like struggle for upward mobility can be kind of undone in a single night for people who are in this kind of precarious race class position. And so, yeah, I mean, you see that like the disappointment that his parents are feeling in him is like so weighted with is so weighted with history and is so weighted with like generations of hopes for their children.
And I think addiction, too, is something that a lot of folks just still don't get. Straight up.
Totally.
Addiction and alcoholism, it's just one of those things where there are people who have sort of this idea that there's a morality that gets ascribed to this stuff or it's a choice. I mean, people have big feelings about addiction and alcoholism, and some of them are really outdated, and some of that is generational, and some of it is just like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Like, disease is a disease, but okay. So watching David sort of navigate this space and his friend's space and figuring out sort of where he fits into everything, right? Kaveh Akbar loves this novel, and that makes me sad. raves about
Such an honor. I'm such a fan of his.
best dude ever, best
Yeah.
dude ever. But also, like, if you think of how he writes about, addiction and
Yeah.
alcoholism as well, too, it's just like, well, here it is. Like, I just want as many voices as possible, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like the narrative has been hijacked in a way by people who are just like, well, I've been on a reality show and now I'm an expert. And it's just like, oh, hi. There are many different ways to approach this. And perhaps we don't have to stand on a hill and smite people, right? Like harm reduction works. Like all of right? Like all of this stuff, you're like, okay, okay. So I kind of enjoyed watching Smith figure this out and watching sort of Elle and Carolyn have their own journeys with it because they're all on the receiving end of other people's big feelings.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, there's obviously like this, moral paradigm like applied to addiction that's like the direct result of like history and, the Nancy Reagan of it all. And like,
sorry, just
is
say no. What
is like an active choice, like to kind of have historically framed addiction as like a personal failing instead of a disease, and like that is so kind of coloring in the novel. And also, I mean, I think I was interested in this like current moment of say the last 10 years. The novel touches on this of like with the opioid crisis,
right?
it's sort of shifting conversation around like the morality of addiction, where people, even people who have like, yes, stood on their hill and kind of smited quote unquote addicts for, the past 50 years, can look at a kind of like white middle class college student who like gets a bad sports injury and is put on an opioid painkiller for that and then gets addicted to it. They can see them as a victim, and a victim of their circumstances, a victim of capital systems, like, but they're not able to then take that same logic and apply it to like a poor brown person who's like using crack or something. And it's just like it's such a absurd. I mean, obviously, I'm very disturbed by that, and I think like I was kind of interested in looking at some of those kind of like micro distinctions.
Yeah,
In terms
absolutely.
of like who we consider to be an addict and like in what way, and what sort of treatment that then merits.
I mean, this is partially why I read fiction, right? Like, I want to see what someone else's opinion is. And, listen, there is one book to read on the opioid crisis, right? Well, two, actually. Yeah. Anything by Beth Macy, right? There's Dope Sick, there's Lazarus Rising, but also Patrick Radden Keefe's.
Yeah, Empire of Pain.
The first time I read it, I was so enraged by the end of it that when I was prepping for an interview with him, I went back and listened to the audiobook because he's so calm as he reads the audiobook. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can. But like, when Nan Golden and everyone took over the Sackler Pavilion at the Met and like threw all the pill bottles into the, I was just like, oh yay, ACT UP is back, only different.
Totally. I saw the movie.
Oh, the Nan, the
Nan Golden. She's like the artist of my life. I actually ran into her recently and told her on the street, "You're the artist of my life." I love her so much.
But this is what we need art for, right? This is what we need literature for. This is what we need, film and photography for. And, Elle has a sort of side thing happening with photography that I'm just going to tease and we're going to leave in the corner there. But the idea that all of these kids in a way, and they are young. I mean, listen, they're in their 20s. They're very young. Our brains don't finish cooking until we're 25. Watching them figure out what power means, what they want, how they want art to be part of their lives without compromising. I mean, it's really interesting watching them all sort of do this coming of age thing. And, traditionally we sort of think of coming of age as like a teenager story, right? Or like, I'm just graduated from college and da-da. These young people really are not as far ahead as they think they are, but because they have access to spaces and people and money, they have a very different experience of the world.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think like they're all also like an aspect that feels kind of, I guess, current about it, like their relationship to art making and like kind of self-expression through art. They're all sort of circling the worlds of like fashion, food, art, I think in a very New York way. But if we compare it to something like a Just Kids, where like we see in that, obviously that's memoir, but like Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe kind of having this narrative around like sacrificing everything to like make work and, living on the street, being broke for years, etc. Like in a way, I don't think that exists in the same way in today's New
No,
York.
it don't.
Like
Listen,
if at all.
rents are so different now. I mean, when I came
Yeah.
back to the city a million years ago, like, I had friends who had a share in, a classic six on the Upper West Side, and
Yeah.
their rent every month was $300.
Yeah.
Like, I had another
Yeah.
friend who was like, "You're paying what for it?" I'm like, "I don't want roommates. I just had a roommate in Chicago. I'm not doing it again. Yes, I'm paying more because I just need to be alone."
Yes. Yeah. And so it's like part of what I think feels kind of current about it is even with a character like Elle, who, as you mentioned, like is a photographer, has creative aspirations, like Smith, who was a poet in college and then kind of goes this other path. Like there's there we see them making compromises essentially,
Right.
on the kind of basis of wanting a degree of comfort, wanting a degree of like looking legitimate to their parents, while still searching for ways to kind of like self-express and find some degree of fulfillment. And like, yeah, that feels very, I think, kind of like modern coming of age in New York, where I have so many friends who are like, are artists in some capacity, but like can't necessarily find a way to make that central to their lives yet. Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think that that's one of the threads of the kind of coming of age.
I also never felt like anyone was chasing fame.
Mm.
Like, everyone wanted to be comfortable, sure, but there's not. There's a certain kind of New York novel or an LA novel where it's like, well, someone wants to be really famous.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that you don't need to be famous to actually have power, because I think there are famous people who have zero power in their lives. And I think there's something to be said for being able to backdoor things. And so, again, watching sort of Carolyn and Smith and Elle maneuver around that without ever thinking. And yeah, Elle has aspirations, but she's never ever talking about, well, I want to be the cover of this, or I want to. It's she wants to do her thing and take care of herself through that thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose there's an implication of fame, but it's not the thing that drives any of them, which is really refreshing, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that they're all kind of proximate to fame.
Right.
Like, I think that they don't like have as much kind of like bloodthirst for fame, because they don't have, maybe, I mean, especially again, like Carolyn and Elle. I mean, Elle has a famous mother. Like,
right.
They don't have delusions of what like fame will give you, because it certainly is not going to give you like happiness or fulfillment. And I think like they're sort of aware of that. Maybe Smith a little bit less so. I mean, one of the first flashbacks we see of him kind of getting close with Elle, it ends with this moment. I mean, this is definitely not a spoiler, but like they basically end up seeing this exhibition at MoMA that's based on Tilda Swinton doing this performance piece where she slept in like a glass box. And like there's an image basically of Smith and Elle looking at each other kind of through the glass box over the sleeping famous actress. And like, that kind of proximity to fame, like extreme nearness to it, but kind of like across a sort of impermeable membrane thing, I think is like symbolic of a kind of larger relationship that these characters have to it, where they either don't quite want it or they don't know how to access it, but they're close enough to it to kind of like derive some of its like glamour. Yeah.
Listen, glamour feeds a lot of folks in different ways. I mean, and there are also industries in New York. Certainly the golden age of magazines, publishing to a certain extent. I mean, there was this idea that, you could work off a lower salary because the glamour was enough to keep you going.
Totally.
So I don't want to dismiss glamour out of hand, and also obviously outdated ideas, right? Like the world is a different place, but certainly there are plenty of people who came out of the fact-checking desk at the New Yorker, or were second assistants at magazines whose names you would recognize. Folks who started in publishing who might not be in publishing anymore. I mean, But I do think that underestimating that proximity to glamour, right? Even
Yeah.
more so than fame, right? Like we still, I mean, the Met Ball used to be a thing where it was not the thing we know now.
Yeah.
Like, you could buy a ticket to just the dance party afterwards.
Sure.
And it's kind of a trip to see it have become this thing that
Yeah.
really has a life of its own. And it is very entertaining sometimes, although there are other times where I'm like, that's a choice. Okay. But watching the evolution of New York, right, through people's experience of the city, it's wild to see in Great Black Hope. But I want to talk about you as a student for a second. You also teach now, too. But you studied with Katie Kitamura, and she was your thesis advisor, and I think the world of her and her work. And I just want to talk about for a second how inputs from someone else might come into the shaping of a novel, especially your debut. I mean, obviously, you'd been thinking about this book for a while. Obviously, you've been working on it. Like, you're working on your MFA and everything else. But here you've got someone who clearly has a strong sense of voice. I mean, Intimacies, I love Audition, but Intimacies is really one of my sort of all-time favorite books. But when Katie does voice, Katie does voice. But like, how do you find your own when you're working with someone who's really got that much on the page?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Katie's workshop was the first class that I brought this novel to, parts of this novel to. And I mean, there were a lot of other great writers in that class, like August Thompson, who wrote Anyone's Ghost, and some other friends who've published since, like, were also in that class. And I mean, Katie is such a good editor for me, slash like thought partner and mentor for me, in part because, like, she has such a voice and her style is this, like, I mean, I sometimes will describe it as like a highly stylized minimalism, the kind of spare thing that she's doing that is so like striking and like creates such a mood. I am by nature much more of a maximalist. I like to pack a ton of like details and descriptions and images in a single sentence. In some of these party scenes, you're seeing like there's a kind of almost like kaleidoscopic like overwhelm. It's like sensory details. And something that Katie would often say to me in workshop, or like when she would line edit our pages, she would be like, I think this sentence has like a turn too many. And so I could see like she was very excited about the pages. She like really like believed in what I was doing. And then she also was like had a lot of attention toward like the line level and like where that kind of maximalist style can be pared down or refined. And that was something that I desperately needed. Like, I think that was like the kind of perfect input. It definitely kind of motivated my decision to ask her if she would be my thesis advisor. And so, I mean, I'm so grateful to her. And then interestingly, when I was editing, like when I signed with my agents, this book was 125,000 words. Now it's like 85,000 words. So, and scenes got added. So it's like a third of it was cut, plus things were added. And so when I was figuring out how to just like, a lot of larger things were cut, but when I was figuring out how to kind of pare down on the line level, I was listening back to, I'd already read and loved A Separation and Intimacies, but I would listen to them on audiobook.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
And kind of get like the rhythms, those like really perfect, like crisp rhythms in my head where I sat down to edit. And that really kind of helped me edit well.
Well, cadence on the page really matters. I mean, I read for language first.
Yeah.
And you could argue that language is voice. Okay, that's fine. I don't necessarily need stuff to happen. I mean, if stuff happens, cool. Bonus, great. But I'm not a plot-driven person. I need really great sentences. That's the thing I need more than anything. And I find that if I don't have great sentences, I get yanked out of the story faster because I start to get nitpicky.
Yeah.
Like, I'll follow you through the party, right? I'll follow Smith through the party. I'll follow Caroline. Like, there's some scenes in this book where I'm like, no good will come of this. That old adage, nothing good happens after midnight. Yeah, nothing good happens after midnight. That sort of chaotic, edgy energy right? Like, yeah, on the page it's fantastic. And yeah, stuff is sort of happening, but not really. You're kind of
Sure,
just
yeah.
walking through a party. It's not like
Yeah.
someone's chasing after you with a thing, you know? But the sentences.
Thank you.
Did you read The Bee Sting by
I
Paul
haven't read
Murray?
it yet.
Okay.
Paul,
When you have a chance,
yeah.
for a 600-page
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
like, you'll fly through it. But he does a thing with one of the characters where there's no punctuation, and I had convinced myself there was no punctuation in an entire 650-page book because of this one thing. And I was luckily
Yeah.
I went back and checked before I was sitting down with him. But the idea that you can move a story not necessarily by what happens, but with sentences.
Yeah.
I would really love more people to embrace that idea, because it is like, it's
Totally.
wild when you get the thing and you're like, oh. I mean, seriously, this 1984.
Yeah.
Like, this was originally published in 1984, and I was playing with it over the weekend. I was like, oh no, this still, like, it. I mean, this book is 40 years old. Which,
yeah.
Sorry, I'm doing math in my head and I don't like it.
No, I mean,
I do not like that math, but 40 years old, and it reads like it could have been. I mean, maybe, okay, throw in some cell phones.
Sure,
okay.
yeah.
Throw in some cell phones, change some brand names.
Yeah.
It's still like.
Yeah, well, because it's a
sibling. Yeah, it's a sibling to Great Black Hope. It's a sibling.
Thank you.
Novel.
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine quoted Bright Lights Big City the other day. I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something about, I mean, we have a mention of like a girl who met at a party, and she's described as like, you knew she was the real thing when she refused to acknowledge your presence entirely. She knew things about horses, about islands, about French pronunciation that you would never know. And it was like, I mean, that's just obviously so good. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think the kind of like the types of people that populate these rooms in New York hasn't totally changed in the past 50 years. And so like there is a sort of timelessness if you pick up a Bright Lights Big City today, or if you pick up, you know, I was kind of growing up reading Bret Easton Ellis, and like definitely also kind of thinking about him as a sort of influence, as well as, I mean, there's so many kind of like New York novels that I think I was like touching on aspects of when I was writing this. But yeah, I think the most successful ones, just like creatively, are the ones that have that kind of timeless energy of New York about them, and don't feel too rooted or like boxed by time.
Let's talk about other influences for a second, because obviously, you know, we have the two majors.
Yeah, totally.
But I feel like there are other writers that have helped sort of make you the writer we're meeting now. So can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like on the sort of New York side, we've mentioned some of them. Like there's the Patti Smiths, there's the Bret Easton Ellis, Jay McInerney. I mean, also a book like Open City by Teju Cole.
Yep.
That book, I read that for the first time my first summer in New York, when I was like 19, I guess. And I would literally just like walk around the city. I had a job where I was working like maybe 20 hours a week, and I would just walk around the city reading that book. And then, I mean, I think on the sort of other side of the book, which is this more like sociological look at kind of race and class, I mean, definitely Marco Jefferson with Negroland, Hilton Howells. I was thinking a lot about his essay collection, White Girls, especially as regards like how I was kind of constructing the tensions in like the Smith Carolyn relationship. But I also, I mean, I love like a poet turned novelist. I like a lyrical writer. I mean, as you said, like I'm also someone, I'm reading for sentences. I like, plot is nice, but it is not necessary for me.
Not the least.
And it's also like, yeah, a novel that's run on plot solely, like I just rarely will love that. I might like rip through it in a day, but it probably won't stick with me. Sentences stick with me.
Okay, but the new Ocean Vuong delivers on sentences and plot. So Emperor.
Okay.
Emperor of Gladness totally delivers, because I loved On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and I love the poetry. But honestly,
I love the poetry.
I mean,
as well.
seriously, Emperor of Gladness, stuff happens. I'm like, wait a minute.
Okay.
What is? Oh, it's great. It's
Yeah, if you can do both, I mean, that's the dream.
right.
That's the
Completely.
dream. Yeah, I mean, so a lot of, I mean, Ocean would be a great example.
Mhm.
Kaveh is a great
Yeah,
example.
completely.
Ben Lerner, like
Yep.
these sort of poet turned novelist, or even like someone who does more kind of hybrid text, like Maggie Nelson,
Yep.
Bluets, is like another all-time favorite book, and a favorite like New York book, just the way that like
Mhm.
New York presents itself in
Right.
that. I mean, I think of the image of the speaker in like the room with the ex-boyfriend at the Chelsea hotel looking at like a blue tarp across like a wind shaft or something. And it's just like this moment of kind of like, it's like erotic, but it's like elegiac, and it's just a perfect poetic detail. Yeah, all of those I think kind of like formed the sort of mental ecosystem that went into this book.
So you working on the next thing?
I have an idea. I have an idea.
Okay,
I'm getting
ideas,
lunch
fair
with my
enough.
agents tomorrow to
Okay.
I'm gonna talk to them about this new
Okay.
idea I have. Yeah.
Okay. I'll sit here quietly in the corner. I'll be patient. But I am super excited for Great Black Hope to be out in the
Thank you.
world. This book is beautiful and wild in all the right ways. You know, I feel like I can sit out in your version of New York and stay there for a really long time because I get a chance to look back on sort of 90s New York and early aughts New York and all of the wackiness that sort of predates what happens in Great Black Hope. But I'm just going to say to folks, you really need to read this book. You really, really, really need to meet all of these characters. And it's a fast read, too. It was wildly quick. And I've read it a couple of times now. And both times, lightning fast. So I'm just going to say, if you're looking for a thing for the summer, this is absolutely the book you need to pick up. Rob, thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over.
Thank you so much, Miwa.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.